Welcome to the Arkaro Insights podcast, where we help B2B executives deliver better results with the latest ideas in change and innovation for your organization. The episodes feature fascinating discussions with interesting people who have a great story to tell, as well as our original content communicated with AI voices. If you can, please read the show notes to get the most from each episode. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoy it.
And provided tomorrow is just like today, you're going to do fabulously well. And you will for a while.
Welcome back to the Arkaro Insights podcast. This is where we bring together practitioners and researchers for honest, practical conversations on leadership, change, and innovation in a complex world. I'm your host, Mark Blackwell. Today, we're tackling a very critical and timely question facing executives everywhere. As AI reshapes management, how do we distinguish between the problems that AI can solve and the complexity that only humans can navigate? To help us explore this, I'm really thrilled to have David Hurst as our guest today. David is a unique reflective practitioner, a speaker, a writer, a management educator who spent 25 years as a senior operating executive navigating corporate train wrecks, which included rescuing a $1 billion industrial distributor from bankruptcy in these. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and author of seminal books including Crisis and Renewal and The New Ecology of Leadership. Today, David and I have agreed to focus on revisiting the Ecocycle in the age of AI. We're going to dive into his famous Ecocycle model to understand how organizations are born, grow, face crisis, and renew. We will explore why AI and LLMs thrive on the predictable front loop of the Ecocycle by relying on static data, but fail on the volatile back loop. Finally, David will explain why mature organizations get stuck on their own success, the rigidity trap. And that's a trap that many organizations in agriculture, food, and chemicals risk facing today. What is it leaders need to do to stop acting like engineers and start acting like gardeners? We're going to explore more on this wonderful topic today. So, David, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Well, thank you, Mark. It really is great to be with you and have this opportunity to talk about this framework. As you mentioned, I spent most of my life in early management life in organizational train wrecks of various kinds. Whenever I seemed to join an organization, it seemed to get into trouble. At first, I thought it was me, but then I realized that there was a systemic aspect to this. And when I looked around and said, where do we find instances of organizations that progress through crises, I found them in ecology. And it was in Canadian ecologist Buzz Holling's adaptive cycle panarchy framework that I found clues to a sense-making model. Because the fact is, you can only start from where you are. But making sense of where you are is not a trivial matter. I want to talk about the ecological limits of artificial intelligence. And to do this, I'm going to present an ecological sense-making framework that will point you towards a vast collection of management heuristics, because we know that this is how we make sense of the world, that our brains and bodies are constantly predicting what's likely to happen next. And we do this in a hierarchical structure where top-down we predict what is likely to happen, and bottom-up we're continually searching for cues as to what is actually happening so that we can adjust our predictions. And so in this ecological framework, we're going to be coming up with this infinity loop, where on the front loop is where I think artificial intelligence fits. And on the back loop is natural intelligence of how we made sense of the world ever since the beginning of time. And the origins of this, as I mentioned, are in Buzz Holling's adaptive cycle. And he got this from studying ecologies, forests, estuaries, all kinds of ecological systems. And the adaptive cycle essentially consists of two loops. The front loop, birth, growth, maturity, followed by decline and destruction, which feeds into a back loop of the release of resources, reorganization, and the growth of new organisms coming into that new environment. So it's really a theory of context of how the world continually changes, and I essentially applied this to my management experience. And this is a very favorable to a rather Eastern perspective, the Taoist framework of two processes, each of which contains within it the seeds of the other. And so it's all about a dynamic relation and tensions between opposites.
I was just going to reflect on that. As I was reading the book, one important message for me that came across is not to think of one being better than the other, but to recognize that you need both at the same time. It's just the context of which is one you need to be thinking about.
Absolutely. It all depends on context. And of course, traditionally from mainstream management theory, context has been excluded because it's tried to come up with a general values-free perspective on how the world works. And it can't possibly deal with the actual reality of the world. And so we need both ends, never either or. And the corollary of this, of course, is that nothing lasts unless it is incessantly renewed. And so this became my ecological framework for making sense of management. There were three great catalysts that promote cooperation in my experience. The integrative one, do this to belong because you want to be a member of a particular group. Exchange, the classic economics rationale, do this for me and I will do this for you. And then, of course, power, the threat, do this or else. Passion, reason, power. And these became the ingredients into which I fed Holling's adaptive cycle. A long front loop and a shorter, faster back loop, and three contexts: passion, reason, power, innovators, all about passion, managers and leaders, and administrators. Innovators, free to act, don't know what to do, the classical entrepreneurial dilemma. You can do anything, but what would you do? You don't know.
So indeed, maybe that's a good starting point to think about it, because I think if we do a journey of the loop, you start out as an entrepreneur with no idea what to do, and that's on the left-hand side of your loop with a great uncertainty. Then we start on the front loop.
That's right. And you don't know what to do. And so you're going to take your cues from the environment where you find yourself, the group you find yourself with, what your friends are doing, maybe what's happening in social media. You're very much outward looking for opportunities, for what we will call affordances, action possibilities. What can I do? And it's a question of trying things and seeing what works and what sticks, since throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And of course, most of these early attempts fail. But for those that don't, you end up where you're free to act and you know what to do. These are the very fortunate managers, because it's a very small proportion of organizations that find themselves in this position on the front loop, to a back loop where you know what to do and you're not free to act. You're constrained by power in one form or another.
So the front loop is very much like Western business management. It's Six Sigma, it's optimization, it's gradually knowing your business better and better, eliminating waste, eliminating defects, and you rise up this loop. And managers get further and further away from their customers and the market, and more internally orientated.
Well, that's right, and I can tell the story of this in the next illustrations. That the entrepreneurship begins in a community of practice and trust. In the background, this is a Silicon Valley network from many years ago, where the unit of organization is the project, not the corporation. And so the members of the different projects might be from many different organizations, but their focus is on the project. And it's a process of improvisation, bricolage, Henry Mintzberg calls it, of make a little, sell a little, make a little more. Think of feel a strategy coming on, strategy as emergent rather than deliberate, as being born in what works rather than any theories. And it's, I've got Stephen Blank's quote in there: startup is a temporary organization searching for a repeatable and scalable business. That's what you're looking for. But there are dozens of reasons as to why organizations fail at this stage, and this is from CB Insights from a few years back, but they're fairly generic reasons why organization failed, and you can see they're as varied as the organizations, and of course sometimes there are multiple versions of them. Of the very few that make it to the next stage of deliberate strategy, where they've found something that works, and they're now going to scale it and make it larger and more rational, more structured, more routine. And here we have Michael Porter's value chain, fits in here beautifully because it takes the disorganized entrepreneurial mess and puts it into a nice rational flows of a chain of value creation. Of course, it's growing, scaling, everybody's doing fabulously well. You want to continue this. Why wouldn't you? You found the recipe, and you get into the conservation phase, and you put in an organization to preserve success. And there's another boss and the big boss on top. And this is an organization which is designed not to change because it's preserving success. I mean, you don't want to change. You don't want to.
And that type of organization has worked very well for us in periods of stable times.
That's right.
And there's nothing wrong with it in that context of the world being stable.
Yes, and provided tomorrow is just like today, you're going to do fabulously well. And you will for a while. And then the world changes.
And that is what many of our listeners on this podcast are tuning in for, because they're beginning to feel that the world is not quite the same world as they remembered it previously.
That's right. They're picking up signals that things are different. I mean, I live in Canada, and we are currently sending a stream of toxic smoke down south into the United States, and they're very unhappy, and their president thinks we should be paying their costs or something, but it is an indicator that things are changing and we don't have any control over those elements that are changing. This reflects on what organizing is. It's a process of abstraction, of diminishing differences, formalizing systems. I won't read these to you, but it's all about making the structure simple.
We're thinking of our forest now. So the forest has grown, and it's grown very well because the world's been stable. But then there's a crunch point. You either do something or you face decline.
Yeah, the forest now has become a monoculture. We've been through the weeds and the shrubs and the lichens, and it's now grown up Big trees now shade everything beneath them so that only their progeny can grow. There's reduced variety in the system. And the trees age. They get eaten out by bugs and beetles. And it sets them up and makes them vulnerable to, depending on the climate you're in, fire in the northern hemisphere, which is why Canada burns the way it does, because our boreal forests are vulnerable to fire. And as the world dries out under climate change, fire is begun to become more prevalent. And so you end up with what I call yesterday's logic, strategy as a rationalization of what is working. And this is where LLM AI, and I stress it's LLM AI, fits in, because it is capable of predicting stable patterns. And at this stage, the pattern is stable. And it's a pattern that you want to maintain stable because you're doing fabulously well. And of course, you've built head office, and it's a wonderful place. And when you were an entrepreneur, if you wanted a resource, you had to find a customer because they were the only one who had resources. But now in the palace, if you want a resource, you've got to get into the palace, and there's courtiers and other hangers-on restricting access. You've got to get into a tower. You've got to see a prince who's got resources, and you've got your back to the customer, faces to the boss. And this is a very common criticism of organizations at this stage because of the stable structure they've created to preserve the status quo, which is what this is all about. And, of course, it predicts in the palace crisis, disaster, which kicks us into the back loop of the ecocycle. And here I've taken my metaphors from an ancient text, the Hebrew Testament, of wilderness, mountain, promised land. Wilderness is a place of confusion where you can wander. The archetypical time is 40 years. I think GM spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness before it went bankrupt in 2009. But it's a place of confusion where it's easy to get lost, and there's many different suggestions about where to go, but no consensus. To get out of the wilderness, and many don't, you have to climb the mountain. Adaptive leadership is the process required to get a view of promised land, community, milk, honey, resources for young people, for entrepreneurs, which gives you choice. And choice is the opposite of crisis. So the back loop tries to capture this process of renewal in a mature ecosystem that can no longer respond to the conditions in which it finds itself. And some of the frameworks one can bring into this back loop, we've got engaging complexity and becoming mindful. Mindfulness as opposed to mindlessness. And it's all about making meaning, searching for what J.J. Gibson, the ecological psychologist, called affordances, action possibilities, things you can do that will potentially be helpful.
I love your analogy of the Hebrew story, because one of the themes we keep coming back to in our journey through managing complexity, which is the back loop in many ways, is the absolute criticality of having a mission and a purpose and a vision. Because you may not know the exact way to go, but to keep the people with you, you need clarity of your vision. And that resonates so much with the Bible stories.
That's right. And it's all about emergence, that there's confusion, and out of that confusion, potentially, it doesn't always happen, of course, that something emerges that becomes a shared purpose, a shared way of going, a vision, if you will, of the future. It's generally recognized that people need vision and purpose, but where it comes from is very much a debatable point. In my view, too much of modern management theory implies that it has to be supplied externally by the leader. When my experience is, and the experience of many successful organizations, is that it emerges from struggle. It emerges from hardship. It emerges from setbacks. And of course, there have been many historians, Arnold Toynbee in particular. He's not very fashionable today, but he looks at history this way, at nations and how they made progress and how it was challenged that played such an important role in their successful emergence.
Indeed. So if you listen to the podcast with Erica Clegg on this, I think she would be in agreement. It's not handed down buzzwords.
That's right. Contrast with the front loop, I think of this back loop as the compass. So we have the map, which lends itself to artificial intelligence and particularly the LLM variety, and navigating in known patterns versus wayfinding, of finding a way out of confusion. Once again, I think this is an excellent tension, navigating and wayfinding, the map and the compass. And of course, you need both. You have to orient your map, as every Boy Scout knows, by using the compass to get it pointed in the right direction. And so they're complementary and essentially complementary.
So I think it's right in saying, and push back if I haven't understood this properly, but whilst you explain the journey of the Ecocycle along like a helter-skelter infinity loop, the reality as a manager, you should think about the front and the back loop at the same time when you're managing. And toggle in between each loop to get the right balance according to the context of what you're doing. So you don't need to wait until you've had a General Motors collapse before you enter the wilderness, but you need to adopt both thinking at the same time. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And once again, I'm not sure I like the word thinking, because I think it's too much associated with the front loop and rationality and logic. I prefer sense-making as a broader concept of how we navigate and find our way in reality.
But as you think about this front loop and the back loop, it reminds me of lots of pairs of words that we often use in business. One of them being exploit and explore. So exploit is like for mature products, just optimize. Explore is more the new business development, managing a world of uncertainty. And this is one way of thinking about them.
Absolutely. And I think James March originated that pair of exploit versus explore, and it fits very nicely onto the navigate wayfinding tension. Once again, you come up with a slightly different way of explaining this. It gives you, or describing it, it gives you a different vocabulary for using in describing your journey.
So again, another pair that comes to mind, and it's thanks to you, catalyzed my interest in a gentleman called Dr. Ian McGilchrist, who's the master and his emissary, who's brought us up to date into thinking about left brain thinking and right brain thinking. And I kept finding enormous parallels between the front loop and his understanding of left brain thinking, and also the back loop and his understanding of the right brain thinking. Can you just expand on that a little?
Oh, well, Ian McGilchrist has been a huge inspiration to me, and I discovered the master and his emissary several decades ago now, and I continually refer to it. 40 years ago, when we emerged from our mess, I wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review called Of Boxes, Bubbles, and Effective Management, and essentially it was a Taoist take on how we had found our way successfully through the crisis that we had been in. And the box, of course, was the structured front loop, and the bubble was the ephemeral back loop, where people come together in temporary coalitions that then pop and they disappear and go off and form new bubbles. And the bubbles are easy come, easy go, and the boxes are permanent and hard to change. So this Taoist framework has guided me from the very beginning, and of course it was a natural introduction to McGilchrist and the master and his emissary.
And my take from the way he describes the left brain is being the reductionist, analytical, breaking down into parts, focusing on how to get food. Critically important, but all about the parts, whereas the right brain is more system, whole, the beauty, the integration of things. Which makes me think that AI is very much more like the left brain than it is the right.
Certainly. I try to be careful by always identifying LLM AI because there are other forms of AI, particularly Carl Friston. Andy Clark is more of a neuroscientist, I guess. But Carl Friston, with his active inference, is working on different forms of AI other than LLM. Now, they haven't developed much traction yet, but conceivably down the road, these other forms of AI are going to be necessary if there's any chance of coming up with an artificial general intelligence. LLM AI cannot do that. It's totally unsuitable.
So I'm trying to bring our listeners back into the practicalities of appreciating the model and what does it mean for them managing their businesses. And if we can say that LLM AI is more like the front loop, then so that's what LM excels at. Logically, humans should excel on the back loop for more right type brain thinking. And therefore, I was pondering about earlier today, because there's been a lot of studies which show that those in the West, US, Europe, are very fearful of AI in the workplace. Much less so those in the East, where we traditionally think of Western business people being reductionist, left-brain thinkers, whereas Asians are more contextual and more thinking about the context and the whole and how it all relates to each other. And I just wonder if it's the natural tendencies of Asians to think about it have already tracked this down, that AI is helpful, but necessarily a threat to the back loop type of thinking.
Absolutely. Richard Nisbet has written and studied this issue for many, many years, and his work certainly supports that view, that Eastern thinkers are much more context-oriented and would put a higher value on perhaps natural intelligence, whereas in the West we tend to have equated the front loop with being human. I think this is the great value of LLM AI, is that it's forced us to reconsider what it means to be human. And it's quite obvious that being human is much more than LLM AI can do. There's hope, I think, that we might get a rapprochement between Eastern thinking and Western thinking through this process.
So what does that mean for a manager trying to navigate his business that he should be doing now in an AI-enabled world where, as it were, someone else is doing more of the front loop? How can the manager, or he or she, leverage that back loop thinking more in their organizations?
Well, I've put together the complete Ecocycle, showing how a startup goes through the process of being a scale-up and then a grown-up, enters the rigidity trap, and the manager is positioned right in the middle. And I turn to another story, which is perhaps very topical, given Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, which has just come out. And of course, it is the time when Odysseus, on his boat, on his ship, comes to navigate the Straits of Messina between the twin perils of Scylla, the rock of stability, and Charybdis, the whirlpool of change. And if you steer too close to Scylla, everybody gets eaten, presumably in force reductions of the organization. And if you get too close to Charybdis, you get torn apart in the whirlpool of change. In fact, that's what happens to Odysseus, is that he steers clear of Scylla and ends up in the whirlpool of change, which eventually spits him out. He can continue his journey. So maybe there's a moral in that story. But basically, this is adaptive space. This is the adaptive space between the rock of stability and the whirlpool of change. Steer too close to the rock and everybody gets eaten. steer too close to the whirlpool and you get dissolved and maybe spat out somewhere in another place.
Yeah. So in terms of managing the organizations, the other thing that came to mind is in this adaptive space on the back loop, you're talking a lot about inverting the organization, and having the boss at the bottom and the customers and the frontline staff at the top, because they're closest to the action and they should be sensing and responding to what's going on. And it's setting ourselves up for a description of how a manager should move from being a mechanistic leader to a gardener. Maybe you could expand on that.
Well, exactly. You see, 40 years ago, or a bit more than 40 years ago now, overnight we went from a growth-oriented, acquisition-oriented industrial conglomerate, really, to a cash-starved wreck. We were taken over in a leverage buyout, far too much leverage. We borrowed in current day about $1 billion. And it was so much money that the banks couldn't afford to close us down. It was their problem as well as ours. And we found we had 19 crises, projects, disasters of various kinds that didn't fit into anyone's job description. So we had to, I won't say abandon the hierarchical organization because it was always there, but we put it into the background. And the foreground came 19 project teams staffed with people from all over the organization, not necessarily with any regard to seniority. And we sent them off and said, here's a problem brief. Get out on the ground, get to the coal face, tell us what you see, and come back with some recommendations. And essentially, we turned the organization upside down. We went from being a structured, hierarchical reporting organization with human resources at the bottom to a network supporting organization with clients and customers at the top. It was a figure ground reversal. We didn't go completely from one to the other. It's just the hierarchical reporting organization, which had been so prominent when we were on the front loop, because that's what you're trying to do, is to make it stable and permanent, went to the network supporting organization, which was consisting of 19 different teams, and that spawned subsidiary teams, and they would come back and say, this is what's happening in the coalface. This is what we think we should do. And we would say, well, you're the people on the spot. You have the best knowledge and ability to act. Go and do it. Try something. They came back with action possibilities. This is what we should do. And so the analytical approach to what was happening went to the background. And a few years later, after we got out of the mess, we got new owners, we got new financing, we left all the wreckage behind. Then the hierarchical reporting organization came back to the fore because it was preserving success. And so it's this continual toggling, and that's the word I've suggested, between these two modes. Sometimes it's a slow toggle and sometimes it's a fast toggle. Sometimes you can toggle in a meeting where if you're discussing a structured part of the organization, you're going to be very much hierarchical and regular pyramid. And if you're running it, on the other hand, going to talk about affordances, action possibilities, you're going to have it in a gardening mode, supporting the existing organism and seeing in what ways they can develop. And so this is the essence of the manager as a gardener, switching continually between an engineering approach, design and build, make it happen, using artificial intelligence, of course, LLM, AI, and the cultivate and grow and let it happen, and cultivating natural intelligence, letting people loose to use their own innate skills. I talked in a blog a few weeks back about how when I was running a steel service center. This is a wholesaler of steel, which is a pretty prosaic commodity business from outsiders, but from insiders. I used to very occasionally get up at 4:30 in the morning and go on a steel delivery with a driver, and we would deliver steel to customers at about 6 a.m. We'd be on the road. And it turns out that at that time in the customers' backyards, you can see all kinds of action possibilities, affordances. You can see threats and opportunities. Competitors' trucks queued up delivering steel. What kind of steel are they delivering? How is our customer doing? Are they about to go on strike? Is their production line full, or do they look as though they're heading for hard times? And so all these action possibilities emerge from being with the driver at that place at that time. It's very much peculiar to that particular business. So this is the fine-grained awareness of what's actually happening, which allows you to adjust your big top-down picture that allows you to predict the world. It's this complementary of the abstract, the universal, with the particular.
An organization of any size, whether it breaks its business by product lines, by customer segments, by regions, is going to have parts of which were clearly front loop and parts of which were clearly back loop. And it's about just knowing the context for which any part of that business is in, and being prepared to switch the style is so critical, what I'm getting from this call. So nothing is either bad nor good, it just is.
Absolutely. Dealing with the coalface, what's actually happening on the ground. What are the possibilities coming out of this? How should we be dealing with this as a matter of corporate discipline and hierarchy, or should we be dealing with it as an action possibility? And how would we make use of it? And I think a large part of the story of successful business is about this emergence of opportunities by creating the right context.
So last question, David, it's the one we ask all of our guests. I think many of our listeners, agriculture, food, chemicals, are finding themselves in large organizations where there's a lot of bureaucratic meetings and a lot of processes, and they're wondering if they might be on the top of the front loop in general. But they're fearing threat of change. What would you suggest they do on Monday morning with their teams?
I always avoid making general suggestions because managers are interested in particulars. They want this organization with these people right here, right now. And any suggestions I come up with that are going to apply to everybody are going to be generic. You won't be able to disagree with them. Cultivate psychological safety. Oh, yeah, okay, so that's good. We need psychological safety. The opposite is clearly nonsense. We don't want people to feel psychologically threatened. And so I can say cultivate psychological safety and everybody will nod their heads. But the fact is, it's true but useless. In fact, I wrote a whole blog about that. It's how do I do it in my situation with this organization, with these people right here, right now. And that advice is very much particular and dependent upon the individual situation.
For me, that my takeaway is sense-making to what is your reality, what is your context, and put effort into that diagnosis, because that will then determine how you respond to that situation.
Exactly. And my argument is that this ecological sense-making framework is most helpful in doing that.
Great. So thank you, Dave. I've thoroughly enjoyed your books. Can you just remind us of your publications and where people can get them on Amazon and other resources to find out more about you?
Well, I do run a blog, www.davidkhurst.com, and that's got access to all my blogs over many years, and as well as details about the books.
Fabulous. Thank you. Well, I'll put everything in the show notes, and thank you very much for your time. It's really been a fabulous podcast.
It's been great, Mark. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Arkaro Insights podcast. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed producing it for you. If you have not done so already, please do subscribe with your favorite podcast provider. Even better, it would be hugely appreciated if you could share the podcast with friends and colleagues. Thank you.